A crocodile can remain almost perfectly still for hours while everything around it changes. Water moves. Birds scatter. Other animals panic at the slightest disturbance. Yet the crocodile barely reacts. It isn't because it doesn't notice what's happening. It's because its brain has learned a simple rule that most humans forget. Reacting to everything wastes energy, while choosing the right moment changes outcomes. Psychology has discovered something surprisingly similar in people. The individuals who appear the calmest during conflict, uncertainty, or crisis are not necessarily experiencing fewer emotions. In many cases, their brains are processing just as much information as everyone else's. The difference is that they have developed a greater capacity for response inhibition, the ability to delay an immediate reaction long enough for the thinking regions of the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, to regulate the emotional alarm signals generated by the amygdala. This challenges one of the biggest myths about emotional strength. Most people believe calmness is simply the absence of anxiety. But psychological research paints a different picture. Genuine calm is not an emotion. It is a decision made repeatedly by a nervous system that has learned not to surrender control every time uncertainty appears. And that distinction changes everything. Modern society quietly rewards visible reactions. Algorithms amplify outrage. Group conversations reward instant opinions. Social media teaches us that responding immediately means being engaged, intelligent, or authentic. Yet neuroscience suggests the opposite can often be true. The faster the reaction, the more likely it originated from automatic survival circuits rather than deliberate thinking. That is why truly calm people often seem difficult to read. They rarely rush to defend themselves. They don't compete to have the loudest opinion. They don't mistake urgency for importance. To people whose nervous systems are constantly searching for certainty, this kind of composure can feel strangely unsettling, almost suspicious. Because when someone refuses to be emotionally pulled into the same storm as everyone else, they expose a possibility most people never consider. Perhaps the strongest mind isn't the one that wins every emotional battle. Perhaps it's the one that refuses to fight every battle in the first place. In this video, we'll explore why some people develop this unusual psychological stability, why it often gets misunderstood as coldness or indifference, and how modern neuroscience suggests that genuine calmness is less about personality and far more about how the brain learns to protect its attention, regulate its emotions, and decide what truly deserves a response. One of the biggest misunderstandings in psychology is believing that calm people simply don't care. In reality, many of them care deeply. They have simply trained themselves to stop treating every emotional impulse as an instruction. This distinction is critical. Your brain constantly produces emotional signals before it produces rational conclusions. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. Our ancestors survived because the brain reacted first and analyzed later. But the modern world is no longer built around escaping predators. It is built around conversations, relationships, careers, criticism, and uncertainty, situations where an immediate reaction often creates more problems than it solves. Psychologists sometimes describe this ability as emotional regulation, but that phrase barely captures what is really happening. A calmer mind is not suppressing emotion. It is reorganizing attention. Instead of asking, "How do I make this feeling disappear?" disciplined people ask a different question. Does this feeling deserve to control my next decision? That subtle shift separates emotional maturity from emotional impulsiveness. This is also why calmness is often mistaken for passivity. From the outside, doing nothing looks weak. Inside the brain, however, choosing not to react is frequently one of the most demanding acts of self-control. It requires overriding automatic impulses, tolerating temporary discomfort, and accepting that not every misunderstanding needs immediate correction. Ironically, people who react the fastest often feel the least in control afterward. Neuroscience suggests that repeated impulsive reactions strengthen the brain's habit of seeking immediate emotional relief. Each argument won, each defensive explanation, each angry message sent in the heat of the moment teaches the nervous system the same lesson. Discomfort must be eliminated immediately. Discipline teaches the opposite lesson. Discomfort can be observed without being obeyed. That is why emotionally disciplined people rarely waste energy proving themselves to everyone around them. They understand that attention is a limited cognitive resource. Every unnecessary conflict consumes mental bandwidth that could have been invested elsewhere. The loudest person in the room is not always the most confident. Sometimes they are simply the most overwhelmed. Meanwhile, the quiet observer is often doing something far more powerful. They are collecting information while everyone else is spending energy. Because genuine strength is not measured by how intensely you can react. It is measured by how consistently you can decide which emotions deserve your attention, and which ones are simply passing visitors that never needed to become permanent residents in your mind. The greatest obstacle to calmness today is not stress, it is stimulation. Modern psychology describes the brain as a prediction machine, constantly scanning the environment for information that might affect survival. The problem is that today's environment never stops feeding it something new. Notifications, breaking news, endless scrolling, online arguments, and social comparison all compete for the same limited pool of attention. Over time, the brain begins to confuse constant stimulation with importance. This is closely related to what psychologists call a variable reward system, the same principle that makes slot machines difficult to walk away from. Most notifications are meaningless, but every once in a while they deliver something rewarding. A compliment, a message, a viral post, or a piece of exciting news. Because the rewards are unpredictable, the brain keeps checking, hoping the next moment will feel satisfying. Eventually, silence starts to feel uncomfortable. Not because something is wrong, but because the nervous system has forgotten how to exist without constant input. This is why many people mistake peace for boredom, and stillness for falling behind. The irony is that all this noise rarely helps us make better decisions. Instead, it fragments attention, exhausts self-control, and keeps the brain trapped in a cycle of reacting rather than thinking. The calmest people are not living in a quieter world. They have simply stopped giving every signal permission to become a priority. In today's world, attention has become a marketplace. Every platform, advertisement, headline, and controversy is competing for one thing: your nervous system. The longer they can keep you emotionally activated, the longer they keep your attention. In other words, many modern systems are not designed to protect your peace. They are designed to interrupt it. This changes the value of calmness completely. It is no longer just a personality trait. It becomes a form of psychological independence. Researchers studying attentional control have found that people who can deliberately direct and sustain their attention are generally better at resisting distractions, regulating emotions, and making long-term decisions. Calmness is not simply about feeling relaxed. It is about deciding where your mental energy will and will not be invested. That is why emotionally grounded people often seem difficult to influence. They don't feel compelled to join every argument, explain every decision, or seek validation from every audience. Their sense of self depends less on external reactions and more on internal consistency. Ironically, this quiet stability can make others uncomfortable. Not because calm people are trying to appear superior, but because they refuse to participate in the emotional momentum that pulls everyone else along. Real calmness doesn't demand attention. It quietly changes the balance of power. The moment you stop allowing every notification, opinion, or criticism to dictate your emotional state, you reclaim something more valuable than approval. You reclaim ownership of your own mind. Most people think emotional resilience is built during life's biggest crises. Psychology suggests the opposite. Your brain doesn't suddenly become disciplined when everything falls apart. It falls back on the habits it has repeated thousands of times before. This principle is known as experience-dependent neuroplasticity. The brain strengthens whatever patterns it practices most often. That means calmness is rarely created in moments of chaos. It is rehearsed long before they arrive. One simple exercise is to introduce a deliberate pause whenever you feel emotionally pulled. Before replying to a provocative message, correcting someone who misunderstood you, or defending yourself against criticism, wait just a little longer than your impulse wants. Those few seconds teach your brain an important lesson. Emotions can be acknowledged without immediately becoming actions. Another practice is to become curious instead of certain. When something upsets you, replace "why are they doing this to me?" with "what story is my brain creating right now?" This small shift activates reflective thinking instead of automatic judgment. Finally, spend a few minutes each day without consuming anything. No phone, no music, no endless scrolling. At first, your mind may become restless. That's not failure. It's withdrawal from constant stimulation. Every time you choose observation over reaction, your nervous system learns that peace is not something you discover. It is something you repeatedly practice until it becomes your brain's new default. Perhaps the greatest misconception about calm people is that they have somehow escaped life's difficulties. They haven't. They still experience disappointment, uncertainty, rejection, and fear. The difference is that they no longer believe every emotion deserves control over their behavior. That is what makes calmness quietly revolutionary. In a world where attention is constantly being bought and sold, every emotional reaction has become valuable to someone else. Outrage spreads faster than reflection. Fear attracts more clicks than clarity. The more emotionally reactive you become, the easier you are to influence. Remaining calm, then, is not withdrawing from life. It is refusing to surrender ownership of your mind. Psychologists often describe emotional maturity not as eliminating feelings, but as increasing the space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. Inside that space lives judgment, self-respect, and genuine freedom. So perhaps the real goal is not to become someone who never feels shaken. It is to become someone who is no longer pushed in every direction by the emotional weather around them. Because true strength isn't measured by how loudly you defend yourself or how quickly you react. It is measured by how carefully you decide what deserves your attention. And maybe that is why the calmest people often seem the most powerful. Not because they control everyone else, but because they have learned something far more difficult. They have learned to stop giving the outside world unlimited access to the inside of their mind.